Hey, post-normies. Okay, I've kind of figured out my setup here. I'm nice and comfortable. I've finally edited down my script. I've run through it a few times. I've edited it even more. And I am ready to get into part 2 of the Rh-negative MC1R gene mutation conversation in terms of the chemistry of this. Now, I'll caveat this with, I am not a biochemist. And the reason why this script took so long is because I essentially had to teach myself. And I had to do a bunch of reading, and I had to do a bunch of, sort of corroboration and following up. And this has not been easy because this kind of research, it takes years and maybe even decades. And I've compressed my understanding of it into just a few months. And so, I hope you'll bear with me here, but I'll just say, the universe has wanted to layer on some stuff, and we have contact in the desert experiences and a lot of validation there, which I'll get into at the very end. I'll leave you with a little Easter egg. And 2 is the premiere of Disclosure Day, which is incredible and speaks to, a lot of my experiences, but also a lot of validation in terms of the things that I've uncovered in the chemistry of this. And then also the Jordan Jozak, Jesse Michels interview that just aired this week. He's Rh negative, you guys. So I hope you'll buckle up. I hope you'll be patient. I'll give you some timestamps along the way so you can fast forward if the material is a little too dense for you. Get some popcorn, settle in, get comfortable, because we're about to go deep. There are a ton of rumors and theories around why Rh negative blood deficiency and the MC1R mutation are so connected to the UFO phenomenon. Some speculate they could be linked to ancient genetic manipulation, modern hybrid programs. And since diving into this topic on my TikTok, hundreds of you have commented that you have a certain last name or a lineage, you have red hair, you have Rh negative blood, you've experienced the UFO phenomenon in some way, shape, form. And I've become fascinated by, my own experiences, by your anecdotes. And so I have been researching the mutation superpowers and the connections to the phenomenon, the reasons why the mutations could have occurred, and its potential connection to a pre-flood ancestor. This is part 2 of the Rh negative MC1R gene mutation series. Now, as a caveat, if you haven't seen part 1, please go watch that. It will give you a ton of context on where this conversation came from, the connections to present day happenings like the missing scientists, like Epstein files, like what the hell he was doing on Zora Ranch. And of course, if you're new here, please consider following me on TikTok, joining my Patreon. Both are linked below. And if you're already following me on Patreon, please consider upgrading your membership to support my work. I just introduced a new founding member tier. I talk a lot about Titans. I talk specifically about Prometheus and his creation of humanity. Go to my TikTok because I have a whole playlist on it. Key takeaways from part 1. We uncovered that most Rh negative concentrations are in certain mountain ranges: Pyrenees, Atlas, Caucasus. These names all have direct connections to Prometheus. The Pyrenees means fire. Atlas, that was the brother of Prometheus, the leader of the Titans and Atlantis. Caucasus, those are the mountains where Prometheus was chained for all eternity to have his liver pecked out daily for giving man fire. And that is where Noah is said to have landed, on Mount Ararat. Okay. We also looked at the migration of the Rh negative blood types through exclusively seafaring and goddess worshipping cultures that came out of these mountain ranges. And then they spread out from there. And so most notably, the Phoenician culture is the one that we really examine the etymology of. Every single etymological clue that we have on the Phoenicians always leads to light and sound. Okay, so that's a really interesting thing that, a surface level Google search will not reveal. We also got to see that the Phoenician alphabet is thought to be the very first alphabet, but the discovery of the Basque artifact known as the Hand of Arulagi in 2021 shows an incredibly similar alphabet that predates the Phoenician alphabet by about 30,000 years. It looks extremely similar to all the alphabets that came out of the civilizations from each of the aforementioned mountain ranges, right down to Nordic, Celtic, and Pictish runes. Okay, if you saw the World Cup jerseys of the Norwegian team, you'll have noticed the inspiration was runic. And we'll get into the mythology and the lore in part 3. But as a caveat to part 2, my research has really spanned the internet. I've picked up a few books. I have done extensive reading. And, I also truly try to avoid AI at all costs, but sometimes I really have to use it to validate certain things that I'm reading, make sure that I'm understanding it correctly, use it for helpful analogies, especially about things like blood chemistry, because again, I'm not a biochemist. I work really hard to push back against AI because it's engineered to tell you that you're correct about everything. I'm not one of those people who just accepts what AI says and sort of lives in my own delusion, which, by the way, I've seen that happen a lot, especially in the spiritual community these days. That said, AI was flagged multiple times for quote unquote safety measures when I asked it interesting or connective questions, and I screenshot those and we'll discuss them along the way. What does it actually mean to be Rh negative and MC1R? Let's start with Rh negative. Rh negative is not a blood type itself. It's actually a protein deficiency on the membrane on the outside of the blood cell. People with Rh positive blood types have it, Rh negative does not. You can have blood types A, blood type B, blood type AB, or blood type O with or without the deficiency. So, one quick aside, your blood type is defined by which glycan sugar structure is attached to proteins and lipids on the surface of the red blood cells. The sugar tacked onto these proteins for B-type blood cells is called galactose. It's called acetylgalactosamine for A-type bloods. I feel kind of silly about the etymology thing because I'm obsessed with it, but sugar structures are named after the Milky Way via the Greek galaxy and lactose. Literally, the translation of galactosamine or acetylgalactosamine would be earth milk originating from the stars. It's literally right down in the etymology of the enzymes of our blood. So I digress. What's the main difference of the blood function of people with and without the protein? The truth is, and this is the truth, that science and biochemistry still don't totally understand the protein's role, but instead guess that the RHD protein is related to gas and waste transport. It belongs to a family of proteins thought to transport ammonia and carbon dioxide across the cell membrane, where it can then leave the body. However, the RHD protein doesn't work alone. It's part of a complex, a team of proteins that work together to manage gas transport, membrane structure, so like the architecture of the blood cell, and something else entirely that I'll get into later. When you're Rh negative, you're missing the RHD protein specifically, not the whole complex. So think of it like a band missing its lead guitarist. The band can still play, but the sound is different. Let's be clear, it's a theory and it remains unproven, but when you're Rh negative, you don't have these proteins on the blood cell membrane. Your body has other ways of dealing with waste disposal of CO2 and ammonia. This is kind of fascinating, just given the rumors that the Greys smell like ammonia. The lore is that it passes through their skin and that's why they smell so bad. I digress. I'll come back to that in part 3. At the surface level, Rh negative isn't really about waste transport. It's about what happens when an Rh negative mother reproduces with an Rh positive father. The baby is Rh positive. If the mother's blood recognizes the difference, it can attack the blood of the fetus, causing hemolytic disease of the newborn, or HDN. And if you follow this conversation, then you certainly know all about the development of the RhoGAM shot. My mom is Rh negative. She had to have the shot with my sister, but it's unclear if she had to have the shot with my brother and me. The mutation itself is weird because usually any upgrades or mutations should work to optimize for reproduction, not against it. PubMed describes the RHD deletion as, quote, a long unresolved puzzle in human genetics. And from scientific reports, Nature Publishing, a significant fraction of the European populations carry no copy of the coding section of the RHD gene, and the author plainly states, theoretically, this polymorphism should be unstable. Some form of balancing selection has been suspected to sustain it. Mechanism remains uncharacterized. Balancing selection maintains diversity in a population for longer than it would naturally. The key drivers are heterozygote advantage, where carrying one copy of each variant outperforms carrying 2 copies of either. So there's something really interesting going on with people who carry this gene but don't necessarily express it. The widely accepted founder effect is sort of like bottleneck on balancing selection, where small isolated populations can keep replicating the homozygous conditions needed to reproductively thrive. What they're saying is a lot of people were Rh negative So it was able to keep this recessive gene going. However, like the founder effect does not explain why or how the deletion happened in the first place. The RHD deletion itself is a mechanical accident of DNA recombination, not something naturally selected for. It can happen spontaneously, and that can explain the origin of a single deletion event, but it doesn't really explain why homozygotes accumulated. That would mean that a larger population that all had the mutation at the same time was able to accumulate in order to sustain the continuation of this recessive mutation. That's kind of weird. Sounds like genetic splicing. We have precisely zero evidence that it occurred in Africa. This is something that I pushed back on the AI for, and it was like, actually, that argument's really thin because basically it's just attributed to Africa because that's where the mainstream narrative of where civilization started. However, Cro-Magnon Western hunter-gatherer populations appear to have been the primary carriers of the deletion into Europe, and that spread dramatically around 30 to 35,000 years ago. That's right around the time of the Basque culture. That reconnects our theory about the Basque and the Berbers and others being tied to the destruction of Atlantis or some other ancient civilization like Lemuria, Mu, which is sort of rumored to be even older. And by the way, Plato says that these cataclysms happen every 12,000 years. So 36,000 years ago would put us right at the beginning of a new cycle where perhaps a new race was designed for Earth. Speculatively. Remember, the Basques have the highest concentration of Rh negative blood in the world, along with a weird language, Euskadi, no one knows the origin of. So I'm not the first to put forth that it could have happened through genetic splicing or another race entirely. Did it come from Atlantis? Turns out there are many, many cultures across the world on every single continent that claim they are descendants of Atlantis. And they all have similar words for Atlantis. And I think whatever's hiding in our blood is it's what's drawing us to this conversation about our heritage, ancestry, and the true history of races on this planet. And I want to make sure that I'm not being misunderstood here because it's important to note all blood types and all mutations have different abilities, have, similar different abilities. In fact, Sarah Bressman-Cosme at Contact in the Desert went so deep into her research using data points from thousands and thousands of QHHT sessions that talked about, different blood types and different eye colors, different hair colors having different gifts. So the thing I want to highlight here is that Rh negative and perhaps MC1R is attracted to the UFO conversation in particular and or is connected with hybrid breeding programs somehow. I'm not saying that this bloodline is special, but what I am saying is that for some reason, particularly this bloodline is connected to the UFO conversation and has more abduction experiences and more experiences with UFOs in general. And some part of me believes that this could be the new knowledge that Chris Bledsoe talks about coming into view this year. So that said, I am not the first to put the Rh negative and MC1R came from Atlantis theory forward. Robert Sepper is on it. I discovered his work randomly by checking sources on Rh factor information and followed it back to a source page written by him and then went down a YouTube rabbit hole. He corroborates the deletion attribution to Cro-Magnon. Cro-Magnon was known for his modern human appearance. It shifted from short, stocky, and muscular of the Neanderthals to a taller, leaner, and more endurance-adapted physique. They had flatter faces without those massive brow ridges. They also developed lighter skin, lighter eyes, and different hair colors too. And as Robert Sepper points out, the introduction of tool innovation. According to Chantal Yegas-Wolkowicz, an independent researcher, astronomer, ethnologist with a PhD in humanities, highlights the introduction of astronomy and an understanding of the moon and stars as evidenced by those world-famous cave paintings in Lascaux, France by early Cro-Magnon populations. I'll just mention quickly, there were 4 stages of tool innovation after Cro-Magnon was introduced on the scene. The tool assemblage was labeled Aurignatian. Okay, Auriga is the charioteer, and if you're familiar with Kabbalist traditions, that correlates with the Merkava or the chariot often associated with orbs of light in the sky. The last stage of tool innovation was called Magdalenian. Yeah, I can't make this up. I'll remind you of how much this conversation is centered around the divine feminine's return to earth and the lessons and literal bloodline of Mary Magdalene, having had a mystical experience of the resurrection of Jesus, plus red hair, plus Mary is not a name. It's actually a title of a highly initiated female, the embodiment of the divine feminine in physical form. The Book of Numbers mentions her to be a Galilean Phoenician princess. Hello. It's like they were leaving breadcrumbs for us to connect once we had the level of awareness needed. So I digress. Let's get into the chemistry. The RHD protein is a part of a waste transporter family. This is responsible for moving CO2 and ammonia out of blood cells. That's partially true. But it's important to know that science's official position is that the function of that missing D antigen is genuinely unknown. The actual peer-reviewed language from StatPearls, which is a medical reference database, is, quote, the function of these highly immunogenic proteins is unknown. At the moment, we're dealing with a protein that has been studied for over 80 years, that is present in everyone on Earth, and whose function we cannot definitively state. Here's what we can say though. The D antigen appears to be doing at least 3 distinct things simultaneously, none of them fully understood. First, as I mentioned, gas and waste transport, CO2 and ammonia move less efficiently across the red blood cell membrane. This is what most of the conversation focuses on, and we're going to keep digging here. Second, membrane structural integrity. The RHD protein is physically anchored to the red blood cell's internal skeleton, its architecture. Without it, the cell's shape, flexibility, and mechanical properties are more fluid. We know this because of the research on Rh null individuals, the extremely rare people who have absolutely no Rh proteins at all, of which there are only around 50 known in the world. These people show abnormalities of cell shape, transport, and membrane phospholipid organization. Rh negative individuals are missing RHD specifically, so the effect is in the same direction but less dramatic. Third, ion transport regulation. The Rh complex appears to regulate sodium and potassium movement across cell membrane. Sodium and potassium are the ionic currency the nervous system runs on. They are literally what action potentials or the electrical firing of neurons are made of. Without the full Rh complex, ion transport rates at the cell membrane level are elevated. The membrane becomes more permeable, fluid, and ions move more freely across it. Speed and ease with which those ions cross the membrane directly affects how quickly a neuron can fire and reset. If you saw Disclosure Day now, spoiler alert, my ears perked up when they screamed about sodium levels in the diving scene. When I say Rh negative involves a missing protein, what's missing is a structural, chemical, and electrical component of the red blood cell membrane. And because red blood cells travel through every tissue, that elevated membrane permeability is being continually expressed everywhere. So now let's talk about what that actually means for CO2. We're all taught that CO2 is just what you breathe out. It's just waste. However, in your brain, CO2 is a signaling molecule. I didn't know this. Hey, okay, so I'm going to leave it there for the free version. If you're interested in going deeper, please come visit us on Patreon at Postnormal. We'd love to have you. Thanks so much.